some roads are more than just roads. In fact, these years of stages, cities, and miles have led me toward the pursuit of inner peace. So these are my insights. Follow Peace, a Maj Miles journal.
The Room You Were Invited Into. A Reflection on the Inferiority Complex by Michael Maj Allen. There's a quiet kind of inferiority that many people carry long before they ever have language for it. It doesn't always announce itself as insecurity. Sometimes it shows up as ambition. At other times, it looks like excellence. It can be camouflaged in taste, achievement, hustle, comparison, perfectionism, or the need to be seen as successful. A person can spend years building a life that looks impressive from the outside while still being driven by an old internal message that says, "You are not enough yet." That is the subtle danger of inferiority, when the very fuel to someone's progress is simultaneously poisoning their soul. The lie of equal starting points. One of the great misunderstandings of life is the belief that everyone begins from the same place. We know this is not true, but many people still live as though it should be true. Everyone can't be born into affluence. Everyone can't begin life with the same level of access, exposure, security, emotional support, financial stability, or social advantage. To imagine otherwise is not reality. It is utopia. And utopia is impossible in a broken world. The problem is not simply that some children grow up with less. The deeper wound often comes when a child from modest means is placed in close proximity to those who have much more and is then left to interpret the difference alone. We're looking at the child sitting in the same classroom, on the same team, attending the same church, in the same social circle, as children who have been given more resources, polish, confidence, options, and visible support. It usually doesn't take long before comparison begins, and comparison, when left unchecked, often becomes shame. The child does not merely notice, "They have more than I have." The child begins to wonder, "Are they more than I am?" This is a first look at the beginning stages of inferiority in real time. When lack becomes identity. There's a difference between growing up with limited resources and believing that limited resources define your worth. A modest beginning isn't a character flaw. It isn't a moral failure. It is not proof of lesser value. It is simply a starting point. But without healthy affirmation, children can easily confuse their starting point with their identity. This is why affirmation matters so deeply. A person from a resource-challenged background needs more than encouragement to work hard. They need to hear, repeatedly and truthfully, that their value is not determined by what they lack. They need someone to say, "You are not less because you have less. You are not behind because your beginning looks different. You do not have to become wealthy to become worthy. You do not have to earn your right to stand in the room." Without that kind of grounding, the individual from under-resourced beginnings tends to grow into an adult who spends a lifetime trying to erase a shame that was never based in truth. That person will chase wealth, not simply to provide, but to prove. They chase status, not simply to grow, but to silence old voices. They chase visibility, not because they are called to serve, but because they are still trying to be seen by people who once overlooked them. At that point, success is no longer freedom. It becomes a courtroom. Every achievement becomes evidence. Every room becomes a trial. Every person with more becomes a witness, and the soul keeps arguing a case that God dismissed a long time ago. The difference between serving and proving. There's nothing wrong with ambition when it's healthy. There's nothing wrong with building, earning, creating, improving, or desiring excellence. But there is a profound difference between serving from wholeness and striving from injury. When we serve from wholeness, we offer our gifts with clarity. We can work hard without worshiping the work. We can improve without despising ourselves. We can celebrate others without feeling erased by them. We can enter rooms without needing to dominate them. When we strive from injury, we are rarely satisfied. The next achievement only relieves the ache temporarily. The next purchase only quiets the insecurity for a moment. The next applause only works until the room goes silent again. This may be one reason life has a way of frustrating certain pursuits. It's when what feels like delay is actually a form of mercy. What feels like being blocked is God preventing us from building an identity on top of a lie. If the goal is to acquire things in order to become favored, the foundation is already unstable. Favor cannot come from possessions. A person can have impressive things and still feel deeply unwanted. A person can have access and still feel like an imposter. A person can be surrounded and still feel unseen. But here's the truth. When material things are used to merely attract materialistic people, the results are consistently the same. When the money goes, those people often go with it. That kind of relationship was never rooted in love. It was rooted in access. The gift of modest beginnings. There is another side to this conversation that deserves attention. People from modest backgrounds do not only carry wounds, they often carry gifts. A modest upbringing can produce resilience, gratitude, resourcefulness, humor, empathy, adaptability, and an ability to see people apart from their possessions. It can create a kind of groundedness that wealth does not automatically teach. It doesn't mean poverty is automatically noble or that struggle should be romanticized. Lack can be painful, instability can be traumatic, but it does mean that a person's background may have formed something valuable in them that the world still needs. Those from modest beginnings often have the opportunity to ground the affluent. They can remind people with access that life is bigger than accumulation. They can bring perspective into rooms where comfort has quietly become entitlement. They can help humanize success. They can carry stories that keep achievement connected to responsibility. But the exchange can move in the other direction as well. Those with affluence, influence, and access can position themselves to create opportunities for those from modest backgrounds. They can open doors, share wisdom, extend networks, make introductions, fund ideas, mentor with humility, and use their position as stewardship rather than superiority. This is where the relationship between the modest and the affluent can become redemptive rather than competitive. One brings grounding, the other brings opportunity. Both can contribute to the enriching of the other's soul, while simultaneously being macro-beneficial to communities at large. The noise that clouds the gift. Inferiority has a way of making us misread the room. It can make opportunity feel like charity. It can make correction feel like a rejection. It can make another person's confidence feel like arrogance. It can make someone else's success feel like an accusation. It can also keep us arguing with people who are no longer present. Many adults are still trying to prove something to someone who left the orbit of their life years ago. A former critic, a childhood peer, a family member, a person who misunderstood them, a gatekeeper who dismissed them, a friend who walked away, a room that once made them feel small. But proving people wrong is a terrible life mission. It keeps them in control of the story. Even if they're no longer around, they remain emotionally seated at the head of the table. Decisions are made with them in mind. Success is measured against their opinion. Progress becomes a rebuttal instead of a calling. But freedom begins when the goal is no longer to prove them wrong. Freedom begins when the goal is to become whole, belonging in the room. One of the strongest antidotes to inferiority is a settled sense of belonging. Not arrogance, not entitlement, not the need to be the loudest, richest, most impressive, or most credentialed person present. Just belonging. There's a powerful wisdom in the old proverb, "A man's gift makes room for him and brings him before great men." Proverbs 18:16. The proverb doesn't say a person's insecurity makes room for him or her. It doesn't say performance makes room for him or her. It does not say possessions make room for him or her. It says the gift makes room. The gift. There is a personal way I understand this. A childhood hip complication developed into a series of surgeries that eventually left me with one leg 1 3/4 inches shorter than the other. Over time, that condition created deep physical consequences. There came a point in my adult years when my pelvis and femur were bone on bone. My community knew I was in pain, and they took action. As I look back, I do not believe it was my position, my possessions, or my social status that moved them to help raise the necessary funds. It was not because I had achieved some impressive level of importance. It was because they saw me as a brother who was doing his best to serve well, even while wounded. They understood my soul. They saw the true gift, and that gift made room for me. In 2015, I received a long overdue hip replacement thanks to my good friend David Wyatt and his family, who worked with the Erase Foundation to change my life forever. That experience taught me something I could not have learned from theory alone. Sometimes the gift that makes room for us is not merely talent, charisma, productivity, or public ability. Sometimes the gift is the witness of a life trying to serve faithfully through pain. That means when the gift opens the door, the person does not have to apologize for walking through it. If you have been invited into the room, you do not have to spend the entire time auditioning for the invitation you already received. You do not have to shrink because someone else has more money. You do not have to posture because someone else has more status. You do not have to compete with someone else's accomplishments. You do not have to explain your whole journey to people who only met you at the doorway. You belong in whatever room you have been invited into, regardless of whoever else is in the room. You belong there. Period.